Throughout history, civilizations have risen and fallen, leaving us to ponder a perplexing question. Why do great societies crumble into mediocrity? Why do once thriving cultures descend into a state where ignorance reigns supreme and intelligence becomes a liability? This phenomenon, often dubbed idiocracy, is not merely a modern concern, but a pattern woven into the fabric of human civilization itself. From the mighty empires of antiquity to the complex nations of today, we witness an unsettling trend. Societies that once valued wisdom and progress, gradually embracing anti-intellectualism and willful ignorance. At first glance, it seems like collective madness, but beneath the surface lies something more profound, a pattern deeply rooted in human nature, social dynamics, and the very structures of civilization. The fall of Rome offers one of history's most cautionary tales. As barbarians threatened its borders and corruption festered within, many Romans retreated into spectacle and superstition rather than confronting hard truths. Fast forward centuries. The scientific revolution gave way to witch hunts, the Enlightenment to nationalist fervor, and the information age to widespread misinformation. In our own era, we see advanced nations grappling with science denial, conspiracy theories, and the elevation of ignorance as a virtue. The pattern repeats so consistently that it can no longer be dismissed as mere coincidence. The real question is not why knowledge declines, but why societies seem to invite ignorance into power. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, though writing in a different era, provides invaluable insight into this paradox. Nietzsche did not offer comforting platitudes, but sharp observations that cut to the core of human behavior. To understand why civilizations succumb to idiocracy, we must confront his vision. He posed questions that remain urgently relevant. Why do we often choose comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths? Why do we prefer easy answers to complex realities? Why do we elevate mediocrity while resenting excellence? For Nietzsche, the root of human behavior lies in what he termed the will to power. This is not simply a lust for domination, though it can manifest that way. It is a more fundamental drive, the instinct to grow, to overcome challenges, to shape one's environment. This will to power fuels human achievement, from scientific breakthroughs to artistic masterpieces. It drives us to learn, to create, to push boundaries. Yet when this natural drive is suppressed or misdirected, it does not vanish. It mutates. It becomes resentment. It becomes the desire to tear down what others have built, to simplify what is complex, to mock what is profound. Societies can stifle the will to power, promoting conformity over creativity, obedience over critical thinking, comfort over challenge. From such environments arise people who long not for knowledge and growth, but for simple answers and skills. This is why idiocracy finds fertile ground. It thrives not because of some external force, but because it answers a psychological need. The need to feel superior without effort, to have certainty without study, to belong without the discomfort of thought. It flourishes because it offers an escape from the burden of complexity that advanced civilizations inevitably create. Nietzsche's analysis of morality sheds further light on this dynamic. He distinguished between master morality, born of strength and confidence, and slave morality, born of weakness and resentment. Master morality celebrates excellence, honors achievement, and embraces life's challenges. Slave morality, by contrast, inverts these values. It condemns excellence as arrogance, derides knowledge as elitism, and elevates ignorance as authenticity. Modern societies, Nietzsche might argue, are saturated with a form of slave morality that paves the way for idiocracy. Here, intellectual curiosity is viewed with suspicion. Expertise is dismissed as out of touch, and the complex is always reduced to the simple. Into this environment step leaders who understand and exploit this resentment. They present themselves as champions of the common man, defenders against shadowy elites. In truth, they weaponize ignorance, redirect frustration, and erode the very foundations of knowledge that civilizations require to thrive. Yet perhaps the harshest truth Nietzsche offers is this: most people do not actually want the responsibility that comes with knowledge. They claim to value education and progress, but true knowledge brings uncertainty. It reveals complexity. It demands constant questioning and growth, and for many, this burden is too heavy to bear. Thus, societies willingly retreat from knowledge. They embrace simple narratives over nuanced realities. They choose the false comfort of ignorance over the challenging path of understanding. Decades after Nietzsche, the psychologist Erich Fromm would describe a similar escape from freedom. People do not simply lose knowledge. They flee from it. They choose intellectual laziness not because they are forced, but because thinking deeply frightens them more than not thinking at all. This explains the tragic dance between ignorance and civilization. Idiocracy cannot take root without society's invitation, and society cannot maintain its illusions without idiocracy's simplifications. It is a perfect, poisonous symbiosis. Adding to this danger is what Nietzsche called the herd instinct. Humans are social creatures, and belonging offers safety. To be excluded, to think differently, feels threatening. The herd rewards conformity and punishes intellectual deviation. Those who question too deeply or think too differently are often ridiculed or ostracized. Most people quickly learn that the social cost of standing apart intellectually is too high, so they remain within the warm, stifling embrace of collective ignorance. But the herd has a fatal flaw. It does not ask whether an idea is true or valuable. It asks only whether it is popular or comforting. Falsehoods repeated by millions gain more strength than truths spoken by few. A society that embraces idiocracy appears stable, even as it erodes the very foundations of knowledge and progress that built it. This is why anti-intellectual movements gain traction. This is why simplistic ideologies spread. The herd sustains ignorance, not because it is wise, but because it is united. Nietzsche foresaw the dangers when the herd instinct collides with the collapse of traditional sources of meaning. He famously declared, "God is dead, not as a celebration of atheism, but as an observation that the old foundations of morality and purpose had crumbled under modernity's weight." Without these anchors, humanity drifted. If the old certainties were gone, where would meaning and values come from? Nietzsche feared the answer. In the vacuum of meaning, people would not become free thinkers, but desperate seekers of new certainties. They would replace old dogmas with new ones. Simplistic ideologies, nationalist feared the cult of ignorance itself. The death of one source of unquestioned truth would only lead to the birth of another. And in this desperate search for easy answers, societies would once again kneel, this time before the false gods of idiocracy. This is where Nietzsche introduced two archetypes that illuminate our current predicament. The Übermensch, or overman, is the individual who dares to think independently, to create values, to embrace life's complexity and transform it into wisdom. The Übermensch stands apart from the herd, not in arrogance, but in intellectual courage. Opposite stands the last man. The last man desires nothing higher than comfort and simple pleasures. He avoids challenge, resents deep thought, and declares ignorance to be just as good as knowledge. The last man says, "We have found happiness," and blinks contentedly in his mediocrity. Which archetype defines our age? Idiocracy thrives because societies produce not Übermenschen, but last men. They offer distraction instead of education, oversimplification instead of nuance, comfort instead of growth. They lull the population into intellectual complacency with promises of easy answers. And the masseuse, terrified of complexity's burden, accept. But Nietzsche did not leave us in despair. He pointed toward resistance, though it is difficult and rare. To resist idiocracy is not simply to combat ignorance in others, for new forms of willful ignorance will always arise. To resist idiocracy is to transform ourselves. It is to become capable of carrying the weight of knowledge and uncertainty. It is to embrace complexity rather than flee from it. History offers glimpses of this resistance. Galileo, facing persecution for his scientific truths. Martin Luther King, Jr., articulating a complex vision of justice in the face of simplistic hatred. Even ordinary individuals who refuse to succumb to anti-intellectualism, who choose the pursuit of knowledge over the comfort of ignorance, embodied the possibility Nietzsche foresaw. These examples are rare precisely because they are difficult, but they remind us that human beings are not doomed to idiocracy. The path forward, Nietzsche would insist, is self-overcoming. We must confront the instincts in ourselves that long for simple answers. We must recognize our own intellectual laziness, our own fear of uncertainty, our own temptation to choose comfort over growth. Only by acknowledging these tendencies can we begin to overcome them. The idiocracy outside us is powerful only because the idiocracy within us cooperates. To overcome is to cultivate knowledge rather than passively receive information, to take responsibility for one's own intellectual growth rather than outsourcing it to others, to choose the discomfort of questioning over the ease of certainty, even when certainty beckons sweetly. This is not an easy path. It is not a popular one, but it is the only path that leads beyond the cycle of civilizational rise and fall. The paradox of why civilizations succumb to idiocracy is ultimately a mirror. It reflects our fears, our intellectual shortcomings, and our complicity. If we truly wish to break the cycle, we cannot simply point at others. We must look at ourselves. We must ask, do we prefer the heavy burden of knowledge or the light chains of ignorance? Do we dare to think deeply, to question constantly, to embrace complexity? Or will we once again cheer as reason crumbles, praising the very forces that undermine our civilization? Nietzsche's warning echoes through time. The future belongs not to the herd, not to the last man, not to the false comfort of idiocracy, but to those who embrace the challenge of thinking freely and deeply. The question is not whether ignorance will arise. It always will. The question is whether enough individuals will rise who refuse to succumb to it. So the next time you encounter a simplistic explanation for a complex problem, ask yourself, are you embracing knowledge or applauding your own intellectual chains? And more urgently, which path will you choose?